But for everything else, it's all raw silicone. Those are ledges, not edges. That's what we're dealing with today. I don't really see those edges anymore. Everything kind of just blends into the skin. Everything kind of just works. Hi, my name is Adam Walls, and I'm an award-winning makeup artist. You may have seen my work in Hulu's The First. Have you ever struggled with trying to blend out a really thick edge on a silicone prosthetic? Well, come with me today on Off the Walls Effects, and we're going to figure it out. We all know that when we're given a great prosthetic, the edges are usually thin and flawless. But sometimes you're stuck with one that's, how should I say it, not so nice. So in those cases, it's really key to understand how to dissolve those thick edges. And it's really key for any makeup artist to be able to do that. Back when I first started working on set, I had to deal with thick edges all the time. It was a technique that I had to master early in my career. And if you're a makeup artist and you haven't quite got that one down yet, don't worry, you're in the right place, because that's what we're going to be doing today. We're diving into two different scenarios. Number one, we're going to go ahead and glue down a prosthetic, and we're going to blend off those edges just like normal, but we're going to use paint to make the edges disappear. Number two, we're actually going to do the exact same thing, but for those edges, we're going to use Bondo and a blender appliance to make those edges disappear. So with that all being said, go ahead and sit back, relax, get comfy, and let's get into this. So just like normal, we're going to clean our skin first with a little 70% alcohol, and we're going to clean our prosthetic with a little 99% alcohol. And we're just going to make sure we get any oils or dirts off the skin and off the prosthetic, just to make sure everything's going to stick all right. Next, we're going to get out our glue, and I'm going to go ahead and show you a pre-glue technique. Now, this thing is a game changer, especially if you're dealing with like a really heavy facial prosthetic. What you could do is you actually glue down the back of the prosthetic first. You let that dry, and then we're going to powder it. And this thing is great because the moment that powder hits, you can notice that it's no longer tacky. This technique is also really helpful to ensure that the entire surface has got a coat of glue. This allows us to get that strong double bond while giving me some flexibility to work the edges of the prosthetic. So we're going to do just that. I'm going to work around my edges, making sure that everything is glued down. So you can see how I'm hitting all those little spots on the edge, really trying to take my time to make sure that I'm getting all of those spots down. I don't want to have any more of an edge there that I'm already going to have. Now if you see any air bubbles or strange lines, go ahead and pull those edges up and reposition things if you need to. Don't be scared to give a little tug here or there. Prosthetics can be delicate, but I've found most of the time they're more resilient than you think they are. So once we're glued down, we can go ahead and start dissolving our edges with a little bit of acetone. So I usually get out an IT, I get that in my acetone, and I start blending those edges out because this prosthetic was made with Baldies. And Baldies is a product that blends out with acetone. That's our solvent of choice here today. So take your time and work around that flashing, and if you see any spots that are catching your eye, go back and hit it. This is the time to do it. Keep working around your edge and try to get those areas that look a little chunky, nice and smooth. So after we're happy with our edge, go ahead and get your Bondo. Now Bondo is actually Prosade cream that's been thickened a little bit. So this stuff is also really great because you can actually use it to blend the texture between the skin and the prosthetic with using a red sponge. By stippling that into place, you can actually mimic some of that skin texture, and it really helps to bridge that gap between the two. Now if you get any spots that are a little too over texturized, go ahead and get a makeup wedge, soak that with some water, and you can go ahead and smooth that texture out. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and dry it and powder it. Now for the fun part, painting. Now if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I really like to paint with my adjusters first. So here I am again, going in with my olive because, as you can see, there is a lot of olive in my skin. Next I move on to my rose adjuster and I get a nice spatter pattern going. So this is where our first technique comes in. As I said earlier, we're going to eliminate edges with two different techniques. And this first one is going to be using paint to get rid of that edge. It's essentially all about the spatter. I really want those speckles to mask that edge. And in fact, even though most of our edges are down, there's one in the back that's causing an issue. And that one is what we're going to focus on. Luckily, that's not a ledge, if you will, but it's still a discernible edge. So we're going to have to handle it. So this technique, essentially what we're doing is we're making camouflage. By using those speckles, by using that spatter pattern, we're going to throw that paint out there to kind of mask that edge. You'll notice when I start going in with those lighter colors like the natural one and the rice paper, you notice that that spatter pattern really starts to mask that edge that we're talking about. So at this point, you can kind of see that I'm going back and forth over that prosthetic with different coats of paint, just essentially trying to spatter and mask that edge as best as I can. So at this point, you can see the spatter pattern is doing a pretty good job of masking that edge. I can still see it a little bit, but don't worry, there's another technique that we can use in just a few minutes that'll take care of it completely. So once we're set with that, we go ahead and seal it up. Now it's time to paint up the wound. So just like I do with most wounds, I go in with a couple different colors, my aged blood, my blood tone, I go in with Ulta Blue, and then I do some little highlights with rice paper. Now once I'm happy with all those colors, that rice paper comes in and I kind of go through and I highlight little sections of the prosthetic. I usually like to fake depth with that highlight. I go ahead and kind of put that in a couple little spots around the edge of the appliance. I add a little bit more detail on the inside. That rice paper is a really good way to kind of create that contrast and fake the depth that you're going to see within your prosthetic. Although sometimes those highlights can look a little painty, so I usually go in with my aged blood afterwards and kind of put that around the wound and in the wound just to kind of break it up, and essentially it solves that problem. So once we're done with that, we're going to go in with our mix of Fleet Street Fresh and Dark, and we're going to go ahead and start adding that to the wound as well. Now at this point, because we are talking about edges, I can still just a little bit see a little bit of an edge up there in the upper left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that blood and kind of get in there just a little bit, kind of tap a couple little spots up there with that, and you'll notice that just by adding that little bit of extra breakup, that edge basically vanishes. Get messy with your blood. That's really the way to go. Get into your wound, get around your wound, get in there with a little spray bottle and give it a spritz and get those little lines to kind of run down the side. That's when your blood becomes really effective. One thing to keep in mind is blood is kind of a last-ditch effort way of handling an edge. You could get away with it on set with an edge on your prosthetic, but all it really takes is the camera moving to a specific position or the light moving to a specific position that might catch that edge, or an actor moving through the frame could catch the edge. So having that blood on hand is really important because you can fly in and fix that problem real quick on the fly. But the best way to fix that problem is to not have a problem in the first place. So for our second prosthetic, it's actually an older prosthetic that I have. I made this thing years ago, and it was one of those prosthetics that I made when I was just starting to make my own stuff. There are all sorts of problems with it. A, it's too thick. B, the color is all wrong. C, I hate the sculpture. The sculpture is way too sharp. The lines are too clean. It's not broken up enough. It doesn't look like a natural wound. But for our purposes today, in dealing with a really thick edge, it's going to be perfect. So like I did for the first prosthetic, this one I'm going to pre-glue as well, but I'm just going to slap it on. I could run into issues with making the edge worse, but since we're trying to fix an edge anyway, I figured what is it going to hurt? And just like before, you can see I'm kind of working around the edge of the prosthetic, trying to lift it in spots and trying to make sure that it's as smooth as possible down into the skin. I know we're dealing with edges that are wonky, but I don't want them to be too wonky. Now, generally speaking, if you do get any wrinkles and spots, don't worry, that's why that thinner is really helpful. You can get in there and lift it up. It's also really helpful in this case because I'm only doing this with one hand. One thing I always say with this stuff is you don't have to be so precious with it. These things are a lot more resilient than you think they are. So if you have a spot that's being funky, get in there with some thinner, lift it up and relay it back down. It's okay. The prosthetic will be fine. Since we're done gluing down the prosthetic, we're going to get our acetone out. We're going to start hitting those edges. Now you can see that corner there is super thick, and the reason for that is because it's just raw silicone. As opposed to that bottom edge, and you can see that's blending off beautifully. So as you can see, as I'm working up around the prosthetic, you can see the edges are super thick. This is one of those reasons I never used it on set. Those edges are pure silicone. And the problem with pure silicone is you can't get that to blend off. As you can see there along that tap edge, I'm still dealing with that problem there as well. So we're just going to peel that flashing off, and we're going to kind of tap down whatever we can tap down, and those are the edges that we're going to have to deal with. As you can see on the bottom end of that prosthetic, blend it off perfectly. That's what you usually want in a prosthetic like that. But for everything else, it's all raw silicone. Those are ledges, not edges. That's what we're dealing with today. So to start out dealing with these ledges, I'm going to go ahead and start with our Prosade cream or Bondo, and I'm going to go ahead and start working that Prosade cream around the prosthetic. Essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to fill in that edge. Now I jokingly call this stuff the spackle of makeup effects. Now if you've ever had to patch drywall in a home, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. It's essentially the same sort of technique. You're trying to bring up two hard edges and you're trying to blend them out so it looks perfect. Now in order to do this effectively, I usually keep the first pass of Prosade cream on the skin and I work up to that edge. I'm trying to create a gradual ramp up to the prosthetic itself. Now you might be wondering why I'm rotating my arm like that. What I'm actually doing is I'm trying to see if I can catch the edge in the glare of the light. Now using that glare to my advantage really helps in trying to spot that edge. It's also that same sort of glare that you might catch on set later if you don't get that edge down. So seeing it in the trailer and being able to hit it now is really key. Do you see that edge by my wrist? That really sharp, pointy one with the hard edges? That's a really, really thick edge, and we're going to have to do something drastic to that in just a minute. We're going to continue to kind of bring that Prosade cream over top of that edge, and we're going to keep building it up layer after layer to make sure that we smooth it out as much as we can. Once we've smoothed that out, we've got it set, we're going to go ahead and get our red sponge out, and we're going to start stippling that texture over top. Now we did this with our first prosthetic, but we're going to do it here again, trying to bridge that texture between the skin and the prosthetic. And in this case, again, the prosthetic I do not like, I'm actually adding some of that skin texture to the prosthetic because when I sculpted it originally, I didn't put enough texture into it. There are a couple lines and that's about it, but it's way too smooth for our purposes. So I'm using that red sponge to really help us in that department. Now you can see as I'm working that red sponge around, not only am I eliminating our texture issues, but I'm also helping to kind of cover up that edge as well. All of it should be starting to come together at this point. Although that weird pointy edge and those wrinkles are still causing an issue by my wrist, and even though that stippling is working everywhere else, it's not going to solve that problem. So we're going to use a blender to fix that problem. Now blenders are really cool small prosthetics. You can get them in silicone or you can get them in transfers. I actually sculpted one and I have a transfer version, and I'm going to put that over top, and that should take care of our issue. Now I did run that prosthetic clear so you can still see a faint outline of it, but what you're actually seeing is the prosthetic underneath. You're actually not getting that texture. And just to make sure we're not, I'm going to go over that with my red sponge as well, texturize that, make it work with everything else, and we should be good to go. So once we dry everything up, we're going to go ahead and powder it, or we're going to take a look and see how our edges are doing. And again, for the most part, I think we've done a pretty good job of getting most of those edges down. I can still see a spot or two that might cause a little bit of an issue, but I think we're in the clear enough where we can go ahead and start painting. And just like before, I'm going to start with our adjusters. I'm going to start with my olive adjuster, and in this one I'm actually using a little bit of blood tone. I wanted to kind of mix up the red a little bit just to see the difference that it's going to make. So I'm starting with that first. Now as you can see, I'm still using that same spatter pattern I was using earlier. Doing that for two reasons. Number one, yes, it'll help mask things. But number two, and most importantly, that's the way your skin looks. Mine especially when you start looking at freckles and you look at the breakup that my skin has. I have a very spattery sort of complexion on my arm. So that's really going to be key for us today. Now that edge along the top is still catching my eye a little bit because it's a little bit lighter than everything else, and the reason for that is the Bondo underneath hasn't completely dried yet. Now Bondo will take a second or two to dry. You can hit it with a hair dryer, but in our case the top couple layers have dried and it's just what's underneath that's still slightly damp. So as time goes on, that will slowly dry, but I'll try to put a couple of extra passes of paint over top to kind of help with that. Now you can see I'm adding those freckles I was talking about. I'm always amazed at how freckles will kind of break things up and really let everything settle into the skin. And lastly, at this point, I'm just kind of going back and forth with some of my colors, just kind of adding a little extra breakup, anything that's catching my eye, and I'm just kind of letting it all settle in to where it needs to be. Basically, there comes a point when you gotta call it. Am I 100% satisfied with that edge up there? No. Are we going to see it in the end? Probably not. There always comes a point when you have to call it, and that's one thing about makeup effects. You have an allotted time frame and you have to get your makeup done within that time frame. It's one of those things that you just have to be really cognizant about, and one thing that you just try to do the best job you can within that given amount of time. So for my wound, I'm basically taking it through the same paint scheme I did before. I'm going in with my aged blood, my blood tone, and my ultra blue to give me those shadows. The only thing I'm doing a little differently this time is I'm actually going with a little bit of yellow. You'll notice that that wound already had some paint in it from years ago that it's a little on the purple side, so I'm going to use that yellow to kind of counteract that a little bit. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go in with my rice paper highlights and hit those little edges where I like, really trying to create that depth, really trying to make that wound feel like it's deeper than it actually is. And just like before, if that rice paper gets too painty, go in there with your aged blood and go ahead and break that up a little bit. You can go ahead and put that outside of the wound as well. You're going to add that irritation. You want to make it look like that wound is angry. And of course, as our last step, I'm going to go in with our mix of Fleet Street, fresh and dark, and I'm going to go ahead and start adding that to the wound. I'm going to go ahead and use my spritzer bottle, get it to drip the way I want it to. And then lastly, I do still notice just a little bit of an edge up there at the top. So I'm going to go to blood to cover that edge up. And I'm going to get up my little blood spritzer bottle. And I'm not going to use a ton. I'm just going to use just a little bit and spatter just a little bit right there. And just that little extra red breakup does just the trick and gets us to where we need to be. And just like that, you've got your final paint job. I don't really see those edges anymore. Everything kind of just blends into the skin. Everything kind of just works. I can't really see that edge along the back anymore, and the edge towards the wrist is totally gone. I don't get that sharp point, and I also don't see that weird wrinkle bit that we were getting in there earlier. And there you have it. Now you got my best practices for getting rid of a thick edge on a prosthetic. Have you ever had to deal with one of those before? Have you ever had one that you just couldn't get rid of? Definitely let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you liked the video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and as always, keep making cool stuff.